Welcome to Healing the Tigress, a podcast of stories and conversations on Asian American Pacific Islander maternal mental health. We are your hosts, Peggy, a licensed clinical social worker and certified breastfeeding peer counselor,
and Jasmine, a clinical pharmacist with a perinatal mental health certification. Both of us are Taiwanese American mothers and survivors of postpartum depression and anxiety.
We don't know about you, but we didn't grow up talking much about mental health in our families, and we want to change that now that we are mothers.
Together, with our clinical backgrounds and passion on the subject, we want to create a safe space for the AAPI community to discuss perinatal mental health issues.
And together, we want to break generational cycles in our own parenting journeys so that we can heal our inner tigress, a nod to the tiger moms before us. We are so happy you're tuning in here. Let's get started.
Welcome back, listeners. Another perinatal mental health disorder that we don't hear much about, and especially in our AAPI community, is bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder occurs in about 2 to 3% of the general population. In the perinatal population, actually around 23% of women who screen positive for postpartum depression actually had bipolar disorder. And so, in fact, many women are misdiagnosed as having unipolar depression. So we want to explore a little bit more. And today we actually have with us an amazing guest who has lived experience.
Our guest today is Michelle Yang. Michelle Yang is an advocate whose writings on the intersection of Asian American identity, body image, and mental health have been featured in NBC News, CNN, InStyle, Shondaland, Reader's Digest, HuffPost, and more. She was a former editor at InStyle and Shape. Her memoir, Phoenix Girl, How a Fat Asian with Bipolar Found Love, is forthcoming from Fifth Avenue Press in January 2025. When she's not writing, she loves exploring new areas with her family and smoking up the kitchen with spicy recipes. I've got to hear a little bit more about that later. Michelle, thank you so much for talking with us today to destigmatize bipolar disorder in our AAPI community. Would you mind starting off by sharing with our listeners a little bit about your cultural background first?
Yes, sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. This is a great program and it's an honor to be here. So yeah, as far as my cultural background, I'm ethnic Chinese from northern China, but I was born in Korea. So I'm third generation in South Korea. So I actually do write and talk about intergenerational trauma a lot because, as you can imagine, people don't leave when they're happy and everything's well. Yeah, so there's a lot of story back there.
When did you come to the U.S.?
I came to the States when I was 9.
Okay, so you were in Korea up till then.
Yeah. And I was in Chinatown in Korea in Incheon. Yeah.
Oh,
So I went to a school for Chinese people in Korea. So
yeah. Do you speak Chinese and Korean?
I do speak Korean.
Oh.
Yep, and Mandarin. Yep.
Wow. Yeah. You're fluent in both?
Yeah.
That's cool. So one of the things we've learned in Jasmine and I have been getting, or Jasmine has her perinatal mental health certification. I'm in the process of doing it. We've learned that it's about like 50% of women with bipolar disorder are actually first diagnosed in the postpartum period. So that means they're entering into this not even realizing they have it, and it gets kind of discovered in that. I think before we even jump into how you already knew you were diagnosed with bipolar 1 before becoming a mom is kind of talking about there's actually bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. And you have bipolar 1, so that's very different. When we talk about the 2, bipolar 1 is marked with much more extreme manic episodes with either sometimes an absence of depressive episodes or, depressive episodes, while bipolar 2 is a little bit more marked by like hypomania, which is like not as extreme mania, and then depressive episodes. So it'd be really interesting to share a little bit about when and how you got diagnosed with bipolar and talking a little bit about that experience. What are those symptoms like for you and how you got treated?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was diagnosed at age 20, which is a very common age for people to be diagnosed in their early 20s or late teens. And I was diagnosed actually when I was studying abroad in Beijing, China, as a junior in college. Right after I arrived, 9/11 happened. And it was just a really stressful time, especially toward the end of the program. I experienced severe depression. And then it's combined with anxiety. You know, I kind of have combined episodes, and the anxiety and depression made it so that I couldn't sleep for a prolonged period of time. And after a long period without sleep, it leads to hallucinations and psychosis. And my psychosis, was severe enough that the program, you know, my roommate reported it to the program director, who then called my dad. And I was taken to the doctor in China. And, you know, they took my symptoms seriously for the first time, because I actually talk about this. It's kind of funny because, I mean, funny, not ha ha, because it's traumatic, but
Right.
it's ironic because in the States, I experienced psychosis. In high school, I already had severe episodes, but while I was in the States, I was never able to get the help I needed because of the model minority myth. Like with this, you know, hindsight is 2020, like, because I had good grades because I was well behaved, because on paper I was doing so well. And it was the 90s. So people were like, oh, you know, cultural sensitivity. They kind of brushed over everything. I was never able to get the help that I needed. And even when I went to my parents, because they knew that I wasn't sleeping, they knew I wasn't doing well. If you have somebody having psychosis, that's noticeable. I was severely depressed, like moving around like a sloth, and, you know, and I begged my dad for help to take me to a mental health doctor. My parents don't speak English too well. And my dad's whole point was that we cannot go to a mental health doctor because it will end up on my permanent record. And then I would not get into college. And then if word got out, no one would want to marry me, and my life would be over. So you can imagine, I'm like 16 years old and already feeling a lot of shame because I don't know what's happening to me and why I can't control this. And then to hear that from the grownups in my life, it just multiplied everything. And I felt so much shame. And, you know, it stemmed from there, right? That like I was unlovable inherently because if people found out, they couldn't love me. Yeah.
They were literally trying to stifle and hide the symptoms you were going through. And it sounds like you were functioning to some extent because you were high achieving and doing well, which we see a lot of with mania. A lot of like really creative, successful people usually maybe sometimes have either undiagnosed or they have like they're trying to manage their bipolar because they can do a lot of productive things in maybe a state of like hypomania to mania. And so I can see where your parents are thinking like, why should we see a doctor when you're doing all the things that we need you to be doing, which is doing well in school.
Right.
Oh, that made me tear up. I'm sorry. I can't believe that. Like, I'm sorry. I feel for you, Michelle.
Thank you, Jasmine.
I'm just like, how awful to say to your child that, no, this is going to look bad. We're just going to have to hide it, when you were begging for the help. And I mean, also, I think mental health issues have come a long way for us to understand and really realize that, you know, this is serious. We have to sort of get help. And I'm glad. And it's also kind of ironic to me that you got help in China.
I know,
it's really ironic.
Yeah. Not when I think about it, usually I think like, oh yeah, you'd probably get that like diagnosed here, like in the States, right? But so interesting that the idea was that.
But there's no model minority myth there. They're like,
true.
You know, you are not okay. They can clearly see that I'm not okay. There's no like, because I got this really prestigious scholarship in college, so there's no like any reputation thing sort of protecting me, quote unquote protecting, because actually it was harmful, you know, from getting the help that I needed.
So interesting how this model minority myth can come and back and bite us in the butt, as I think we're realizing this now. A lot of it is actually harmful to us, the narrative. And so it's good we're talking about it. I'm really glad to hear, and I like, I know that your story has a happy ending, so I'm really happy to sort of share and like kind of walk us through this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, okay, so you got diagnosed in your 20s, and then what happened after
Mhm.
after you sought help in China? Did they get you on medications, or how did you stabilize?
Yeah. So actually, that was just the initial. They put me on antipsychotics, and then my dad brought me home, and so I was hospitalized in the States, and I was actually diagnosed in the States. And as a lot of people who get diagnosed with bipolar, at first, because that's the more severe diagnosis, I guess, they say maybe it's major depressive disorder first. And so I got put on an antidepressant first, but that of course made me
Made it worse,
manic.
right?
And
Mhm.
so yeah, and then they were like, okay, you are bipolar. You'll have bipolar. Of course, I try to say you have bipolar instead of the R for the language is very
Yeah.
important. And so yeah, and it was terrifying because as a young Asian American immigrant person who's just been diagnosed with bipolar, I had this, both feelings of extreme relief because finally I had a label name that it wasn't my fault, because growing up, failure was never an option, and yet I couldn't control this about myself, that this kept happening and I didn't know why. And now I had this diagnosis. It's a condition. A lot of people have it, so it's not just me. It's not my fault. There's a medication that can help. There's a treatment for it. And so it was, on the one hand, a huge relief. On the other hand, terrifying because I don't know anyone else personally who has this. It's highly stigmatized. I don't know if my life is over because it does feel that daunting, right? It does feel like, because it's like, I don't know anybody else who's been in a mental hospital. And if my life is over at that point, like I got this fancy scholarship, I've always been, high achieving, like, does none of that matter now because I have this severe mental health condition that is a disability? Does this mean that I'm going to be just a burden to my parents, and yeah, no one will love me, so my life is over essentially? And when you're 20, you don't know. You literally don't know. And where I always turned for answers was the library. And luckily for me, so my parents ran a takeout restaurant, and I worked in that restaurant since immigrating. And really lucky for me, there was a public library right across the parking lot, and so I spent a lot of time there. And I went to look for anything memoir. Like I wanted to find proof because like internet was just kind of taking off, and so I wasn't Googling. I was looking in the library. I was like, I just need someone, like some story, to some proof that you can be okay. You can live with this condition and be okay and live a normal life. And there wasn't much. There certainly wasn't anything written by a BIPOC person, by a BIPOC woman. And so that was disheartening, but I was able to find like one or two books, and so by white people. And so that gave me some heart and some hope. Yeah, I just put one foot in front of the other. And, I was never one to try to like deny my diagnosis because it was so scary in my episodes and I wanted to be well. So I did everything I could to maintain my stability and wellness. Unfortunately, my parents, they don't understand, right? And they still wanted to cling on to this image of me as this like perfect high achieving daughter so much that they were like, you don't need this medication anymore. And they like over and over try to talk me out of taking my medication. And I was like so grateful that I had my own insurance and I could get my own medication because I was not listening to them, because this is my life and my wellness. And because they were afraid that the medication would make me become addicted to drugs, which is not true at all, but that's the lack of awareness that they had. And so, yeah, it was really hard. But that shame, that internalized stigma, I still carried for decades. It was like on a need to know basis. I told very few people, very ashamed of it for nearly 2 decades. Like, oh, I'm not like those people. I have bipolar, but I'm not like those people. It was like, so I was very much in denial. And it wasn't until like my mid to late 30s that I really came to terms with like no, this is serious and I have this and I need to embrace it, face it, and it started with going to like realizing how much it was putting a wall in the relationships that I have, because like, yeah, if you're not showing up as your full self, not, this was a wall in all my relationships. Of course, I shared with my partner and, like close family members, but yeah, friends, colleagues, and it was really made my self-esteem, my confidence really low at work. And I wasn't sharing because I felt like if people knew that I lived with a mental health condition, it would definitely be career limiting. But the fact that I had no confidence because I was keeping this secret in the closet was also career limiting, And so it has just been life changing since I shared my story and kind of now been able to come out as my full self, show up as my full self.
And so freeing because you get to live in your skin,
This is kind of a weird analogy, but I don't know why when you were talking about all this, I suddenly thought of like Elsa from Frozen. Like how, like how she was like, so like, oh my God, I have to hide this. Like, I just need to be somebody totally different because no one's going to love me or like understand where all this is coming from. But like, why does that make you a bad person? You're not. You're just trying to get by just like everybody else, right? And then like discovering like how she could harness that and like thrive with it. I don't know. I feel like you're like you're like an Elsa.
You're Asian Elsa. I love that analogy. Can you tell we're moms?
I know.
Yeah, this is what's on our minds.
Well, okay, so thank you for sharing that background. I want to jump a little bit more into now like your motherhood story, right? A lot of women who are diagnosed with bipolar disorder, 60 to 70% of women who already know they have it will have mood episodes recur during the perinatal period. So did you know this before going into like family planning, and how did sort of having a bipolar disorder diagnosis influence how you decided to plan for a family?
Yeah, so I didn't know that statistic specifically, but I knew it was going to be a high risk pregnancy, right? And that I had to be very careful. I assembled the best team I could of a psychiatrist, psychotherapist, and OBGYN, and like everybody knew. And I began, like, I was in therapy since I was diagnosed, kind of off and on, but I began intensive therapy before I was pregnant, like, once we were like thinking we were going to have a family. And that was of course really hard but I was like, I need to heal so that I can be ready, like feel ready to have this child. And my husband and I, we talked very carefully about starting a family, and we discussed adoption as an option as well. I used to work in adoption but we were very excited to be parents, and my husband really wanted to experience having a biological child if it was a possibility. And since I have been so stable since being diagnosed, we didn't think that there was any reason. We were financially stable. We both had graduate degrees. We, owned a house. We didn't think that there was any reason that we shouldn't pursue having a child biologically. Yeah.
That's kind of like the best thing to hear is that like, you really desired this, and you knew kind of going into it that, yes, we're going to have some challenges, but, we've created the best foundation possible. And now all we have to do is make sure that, like you said, assemble the best team to get us through this. Right.
And not that it wasn't easy, but also like, of course, everybody's thinking, well, but it's genetic as well. But and nobody wants to pass on a health condition to their child. But same goes for cancer. We don't tell people who with cancer in their family not to have kids, or diabetes or asthma. We all take risks when we have children, right? But it's not only biological, it's nurture as well, right? It's nature nurture. So we can't control what genes our son got biologically from us, but we can control the environment. And so our son is growing up having a childhood and growing up in an environment that is so different than how I grew up or how my husband grew up, and so we're just trying to have that positive parenting. We don't, practice corporal punishment. We don't yell, and I just hope that that makes a huge difference as well. Yeah.
I love that you made an intentional decision to almost, like, if you think back to the teenage version of you that said, how am I ever going to do anything? I wonder if it even ran through your mind, like, how will I ever even be a mother one day? But being able to say, like, this shouldn't stop me from being able to birth my own child and to have a biological child. And I think that is that intentional decision when you're weighing between like adoption or not kind of lets you tell that younger you, like, I can still do the things that I thought I wanted to do even before knowing I had this diagnosis. And also to your point about the nature versus nurture, it's so true because people, yes, there is like a X% likelihood, but that's not the only thing. There are definitely people who have parents that have certain mental health diagnoses that either something traumatic happens and it can trigger an episode, or nothing traumatic, not that we can avoid trauma, but like nothing significantly traumatic happens and we give our children the right type of environment to thrive. And it's so great that you're making all of those intentional decisions in this parenthood journey. I would love to hear about your pregnancy experience, because I imagine you've been medicated for some years, managing your symptoms through it, through both a combination of like medication and therapy. Did you stay on the medications during pregnancy? And if you didn't, how did you get off, or what was the plan? What was kind of navigating that like as a pregnant person?
Yeah, it was all very anxiety inducing. Having a baby for the first time is really scary, just that in itself. But navigating it along with the filter of having, living with bipolar disorder and dealing with medications, yeah, it's really challenging. And my psychiatrist had me taper off my medication because the medication that I had been on for, almost a decade at that point is Depakote. And that's what I'm on now as well. And it works really well for me. And I am very fortunate because a lot of people struggle for years to find a medication that works. And I was lucky that the first one I got put on works. And so I never got off of it except for the term of the pregnancy, for the duration of the pregnancy. So I was tapered off of the medication. And the understanding was that they'll just closely monitor me because I was going to therapy appointments all the time. I had psychiatry appointments, OBGYN appointments, right? And just that if I was unwell, then they would make a plan and adjust and give me other medications that are safer during pregnancy. And I thought this was a fine plan because I had managed my condition so well on Depakote all these years. And I thought that I knew the signs where it's like, okay, if I'm not sleeping, if I'm not, like I would know the signs to be able to have time to call the doctor when I noticed that I'm not well. What I didn't realize was I was only able to have that leeway because of the medication. So that medication gives you a lot more buffer. And because I've been on Depakote for so many years, that I kind of took that buffer as like kind of for granted, as like that's part of me. I had a great pregnancy. For the most part, I was super happy, like really doing really well. We were really excited about the child. But at the end, I was already full term. I was like about to give birth. That's when I describe it as like fell off a cliff, because there was no buffer. And the reason why that happened, one of the contributing factors was that it was super hot. This was in Seattle. I was very uncomfortable, very pregnant and uncomfortable. And Seattle was having like a record heat summer of over 100 degrees. And our house, which was a new house, did not have AC because in Seattle at that time, not all houses had AC because climate change hasn't,
never hot.
Seattle, like sea breeze, like you open the window and it should be fine. But it was so hot that summer that I couldn't sleep. And, that's a lot. There are a lot of researchers and doctors who believe that bipolar disorder is a sleep disorder, right? Because it's so closely connected. So once I couldn't sleep for a prolonged amount of time, that's when I had some serious symptoms that made it a really hard birth experience. And what I also didn't expect was for my therapist and my OBGYN and my psychiatrist to all give me different advice when I did call them. And I was already kind of unwell. And my OBGYN was baby centric, understandably, right? So she was like, don't take any psych meds, only take Benadryl to help you sleep. And Benadryl does not work on someone like me with bipolar 1. It doesn't do anything. And I need something, stronger. And then my therapist, because she had gotten to know me really well, like building up to the pregnancy and all through pregnancy, and she really liked me. And she, it's rare actually for a lot of people. And I think I'm hoping that it's becoming better, but this was, 10 years plus ago. And there's still a lot of stigma even within the mental health provider community. And so I've had more than one therapist believe that I was misdiagnosed, that I don't have bipolar, even though I have psychosis. I've had psychosis and I have been hospitalized, but they see me with my master's degree working at this like really stable, coveted job. And, just they see me and they're like, oh no, it's impossible that you have bipolar, And so she didn't believe I had bipolar. She thought I was misdiagnosed. So she was like, just take a warm bath was the therapist appointment, but therapist's suggestion. Whereas my psychiatrist wanted me to take, those, I don't remember what exactly it was, but it was, drugs that is a sleeping pill that would knock me out. And because I wasn't well already, I was compromised. I wanted to believe that I didn't need the serious medication that might potentially be harmful to my child, because it's like, I want to protect my child at all costs. So I took a bath and took Benadryl, but it didn't do anything, And so yeah, that made it to be a more traumatic birth than it needed to be. Yeah.
We recently had an episode on, it was actually my experience with postpartum insomnia. Mm-hmm. And I can attest that not sleeping for days is really wild. Like it just really drives a wedge into the depression, into the anxiety. Mm-hmm. And I went on the podcast episode, I'd say 48 hours. I went back to like review everything, and actually it was probably closer to 3 days I didn't sleep. And I think that was kind of the spiral, like the really big spiral for me. And especially if you have bipolar disorder, we already, like, as us providers studying this, we know that not sleeping in general is just going to worsen that mental health condition. So I actually kind of wonder, and I ended up taking Seroquel, which is quetiapine. It's a second generation antipsychotic for my sleep at low doses. At low doses already, it is sedating. It is prescribed at higher doses for bipolar disorder. And so I have a feeling they probably would have given that to you to help you sleep. And that
it works.
That
works.
Makes you drowsy, right? And that medication has like low relative infant dose in breastfeeding. It's tested to be safe. Depakote, I'm just going to throw it out there for our listeners so they know, Depakote is one of those drugs that is an absolute no-no while you're pregnant. So actually nowadays, I think prescribers, if they know that you are a person of childbearing potential, so 20-year-old you today probably would not have been started on something like Depakote, because they just know down the line, if this is your stable drug, and to take that away from you when you are wanting to reproduce and have a child and breastfeed and everything, it's just going to make it that much harder to find something that works for you, right? So nowadays, I don't think they start anyone on Depakote, but like you said, this happened like years and years ago. You were 20 years old. Mm-hmm. So they probably weren't thinking that far ahead about those kinds.
I was 30. I was 20. Yeah, I was 32 when I gave birth, but but still,
like,
I 10 years ago.
It just sounds like back then maybe they weren't as, conscious of that, and could have started you on something else to trial. Who knows? But I just wanted to throw that out there for people that, like, most medications, like we talked about this on another episode, most medications are pretty safe for
Mm-hmm.
during pregnancy and breastfeeding and the postpartum period. But the one big no actually is Depakote. So you just happen to
Mm-hmm.
have that one as yours that you had to sort of be
Yeah.
off of during pregnancy. So I'm sorry that
Right.
kind of was the experience. And
Yeah.
so actually then during postpartum, did you end up developing like postpartum mood disorders, and did you have to restart the medication in postpartum?
Yeah. I did. I did. I was quite depressed right after. Once you come out of a manic episode, I definitely usually crash really hard with depression, and especially having had those symptoms while pregnant, while for full term pregnant, super traumatic, right? And so, yeah, after giving birth, they had put me on a different medication that was safe during, deemed safe during pregnancy and nursing, but unfortunately, I was still not feeling myself on that. And so, after about a month, I made the decision to get back on Depakote because I thought, my mental health, having my mental health back is going to make me a better mom.
Mm-hmm.
But it was so hard because it meant that I had to stop breastfeeding. And this is 10 years ago. I was 32. I'm about to turn 43. Like that, breast is best is all over the place, and all the mom groups send them in. They're like, oh, breast is best. And everybody, all they can talk about is breastfeeding, and so it made me feel terrible. It made me feel like a terrible mom. And it definitely contributed to postpartum depression, and it took like I almost a year for me to feel back to my normal self again after giving birth, even though I was back on Depakote after a month. But yeah, it was definitely that the breast is best really was detrimental to my mental health. Yeah.
There's probably like a variety of all sorts of things sort of like contributing to it. It wasn't just the disorder anymore that was causing depression, right?
Yeah.
The circumstances
Mm-hmm.
of being a new mom, the hormone change, the female hormone changes in
Mm-hmm.
your body too that are different than maybe you had experienced with just bipolar disorder
Mm-hmm.
without being pregnant or postpartum. And just kind of life circumstances, and like you said, the outside social pressures of what it means to be a good mom. And I felt that
Mm-hmm.
too, because my biggest contributors to my depression were the insomnia and the breastfeeding problems, because
Mm-hmm.
I just
Mm-hmm.
felt like I threw the kitchen sink at this. Why isn't this working? And does that mean
Mm-hmm.
I've like sort of failed? And even after I stopped
Yeah.
breastfeeding, my mental health was still crashing. And, and I'm like, well, then why did I give up breastfeeding? Then did I just do
Mm-hmm.
that for nothing? But
Right.
like you said earlier, like protecting your mental health and being the best version of you is the best thing you could have done for your child. Your child's fed. That's the most important
Mm-hmm.
thing, right? How they get fed, as long as they're growing, that's all we really need. They're loved, they're fed, they're safe, they're warm, right? But I know, and you probably were thinking this too, that just you get inside your head and you just you
Absolutely.
compare to everyone else, and you're like, why am I not like that mom?
Yeah. And I know this is, I'll be like a braggy mom for a second. I know it's anecdotal. My son is plenty smart. He never gets sick. Like all the things that you hear that is like, oh no, if you don't breastfeed, your kid's going to be dumb and your kid will get sick all the time. Like none of that happened in our case. He slept really well, like we're just, yeah, super, grateful as parents. All of those fears, like if I can go back and talk to that postpartum Michelle and been like, everything is going to be okay, that would be like such a gift, right? I'm sure a lot of us feel that way.
And we talked
Yeah.
about in the episode with Dr. Nia too, the risk of your untreated mental health is like when you weigh the pros and cons at the end of the day, it's
Mm-hmm.
like you need to treat your mental health first, like
Mm-hmm.
before anything else. And also
Mm-hmm.
when I think about the formula and like debate, how many of us were on formula? Like our whole generation was formula fed, and we are fine. We're all highly educated and doing just fine. So it's like, oh my gosh. And especially as someone who is like a certified breastfeeding peer counselor, like one of the big things is like, don't push that on folks if at the end of the day they say, I don't think I can do this anymore, help them transition off of, in a safe way of weaning, and honoring the fact that sometimes that just isn't going to work for everybody and the baby's going to be fine.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it is so hard breastfeeding for so many people that they kind of have to double down and justify why they made such a difficult choice, so that it's like make it look like formula is such a worser choice when it not necessarily is. Yeah.
It sucks we have to justify that though.
Yeah.
So I know that you mentioned psychosis a lot in your experience with bipolar. And a lot of times when people learn about bipolar, it's marked by the high highs and the low lows. And when I used to work in the hospital and I'd have newly diagnosed folks with bipolar, I would always print out this little illustration of this carousel ride, and it would help explain mixed episodes, mania, hypomania, like the cyclical nature, all these things, and just kind of really painting that picture. But oftentimes what either doesn't get talked a lot about is that, experience of psychosis. And sometimes it's like, first of all, like, what's the difference between a manic episode and full-blown psychosis? And then also, we know that not everyone who has bipolar will, necessarily have psychosis, but it can happen, right? Maybe at least like once in the experience of someone who has bipolar. And then we also learn, that bipolar disorder can be a big risk factor for developing postpartum psychosis as well. And that postpartum psychosis occurs in about like 1 to 2 moms per 1,000 live births globally. You mentioned, like you didn't sleep, and then I wasn't sure if it was like you experienced the psychosis in pregnancy or if you had an episode like that postpartum, or was the postpartum experience mostly the depression?
For me, the psychosis was during pregnancy, during late pregnancy, and then postpartum, I was already on on some medication, even if it wasn't Depakote yet. So that ended my psychosis, thankfully. So I was only quote unquote dealing with the depression in the aftermath, after the birth.
Yeah, I think it's kind of good to sort of distinguish that. Psychosis is an emergency, actually, and so they really,
it's a crisis.
They really had to take that seriously if you were going through that. And it kind of just sort of attributes like, your parents wanted you to be on no medications at all, like ever. And it's like, no, this keeps me well at my baseline and safe. I don't want to be in crisis mode, right? For women out there who might be living with bipolar disorder, but say they really want to become a mom, or like women who straight up thought, I'm not even going to consider it because I have this disorder. Maybe they just already self-limit themselves. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, I try actually not to give advice, but I talk as somebody who, with my own lived experience. And I actually get asked this question because it is a question that people who live with bipolar really contend with, right? It's a hard question. There's no one right answer, right? I'm not going to say like, oh, people with bipolar go have kids, because like I said earlier, it's for anybody who is trying to decide whether or not to become a parent. That's a huge decision. Are you financially secure? Or do you have support? This is going to be a big responsibility. Are you ready? Are you ready to be a good parent? Even if did you heal? If you had childhood trauma, like all of these things, are you willing to make a commitment to heal? Like all of these questions, anybody need to ask themselves whether or not you have bipolar disorder. So, but if you do have bipolar disorder, and you can't be confident about like all of these things, then I would question like, then maybe you're not ready. like, but that's not for me to say. That's for the person who's making that choice to make that call. So, yeah. And so I wouldn't say it's like an automatic no. It was really difficult when I was going out to try to assemble my like dream team of doctors when I was trying to have a child. It was actually really hard to assemble that team because a lot of providers straight up rejected me because they were like, no, you have bipolar 1, you shouldn't have a child. They literally told me to my face, they're like, maybe wait 4 years or more, like, and I'm like, I'm 31, and like, no, we are not. Like, we've been, my husband and I have been together for years. Like, we've been married for years. Like, we're ready to have a family for, and I was furious that this doctor would tell me that I can't have a child. And it definitely felt like, in the dark ages, I mean, it wasn't even that long ago, but when people would sterilize people with mental health conditions, right? Because it's like, you would never tell somebody who had cancer and is in remission to be like, no, you can't have a child because it runs in your family. You're BRCA2 positive. You can't get pregnant. You're not allowed. Like, who tells someone that, you have diabetes in your family, you can't have a child? No, but we do that with mental health conditions. Yeah.
I think one thing I appreciate about your advice, not advice, is that everyone's experience with bipolar disorder is also very different, right? And one thing that I do, notice is, like you said before, you're highly educated, you have the resources, you had the education to, come up with your ideal dream team. And there might be people out there that are trying to do this with less resources. And again, doesn't mean that
it's privilege, right?
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that they still can't, but it's also like, what level of hurdles are you willing to jump over and jump through to get there? And at the end of the day, it is such a personal decision, with or without having any diagnosis, that, there's going to be hoops to jump through anyway.
And I'll also say that it's not just treatment. Like, I am very careful with my lifestyle. I don't drink alcohol. I protect my sleep. I make sure I go outside every day, like, I don't do drugs. Like, there's all of these things that I think a lot of people are not in a position to. I don't drink caffeine either. I was like, there was something else that people were like, what? Yeah, I don't drink caffeine either. Yeah, I don't drink caffeine. Yeah, and I'm already energetic enough. Yeah. And so
the only legal drug.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a lot to be mindful of before entering. I mean, I didn't do all this just for my child. I did it because I wanted to live well, but you can't be a good parent, for me, this is just for me, like, until I have everything kind of in order. Right. Yeah.
So I want to pivot a little bit and talk about some of your work. And I know that your work involves a lot of writing that covers media. What are some of your thoughts about how mental health is negatively portrayed, or false stereotypes, specifically of bipolar disorder, that are perpetuated in the stories that are told, whether in the media or film, etc.?
Absolutely. There's like this definitely a stereotype of the mad genius or the mad scientist. And, mental illness is both glamorized and stigmatized in this like really dramatic way on screen and in news, and whenever there's a shooting, it's blamed on mental illness, which is really, really unfortunate, because that's not, people who live with mental health conditions are not statistically violent at all, but yet we get all the blame, and I have always said, since I became a mental health advocate, that the people who are in crisis, actively in crisis with their mental health conditions, they cannot hide. So whereas the rest of us who are stable, like me, I hid for 2 decades because I wanted to separate myself from that stigma that is very visible, And so then all the people who are doing well and thriving, we're silent and hiding. And so the only visible people are the ones who are in crisis, which is not the case, but it's this like catch-22 of like, it just builds this stigma, because especially like for writers or, people who are in an entertainment industry, like somebody who's a hot mess is entertaining. Somebody who's doing well and like a stable suburban parent, nobody's going to watch that. Like, oh yeah, they're living a good life. Like, that's boring, right? Like there's no events happening, like no crisis happening. But it's so dangerous, because then the people who are in crisis think that everybody who live with mental health conditions, this is the only way to be, because they're not seeing anybody. Just like when I was 20 and didn't know anyone, I didn't have any examples of people who are living normal, healthy lives and managing their mental health condition well. So then they don't have hope. Like they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I truly believe that's why the suicide rates are so high and why it's people believe that it's a death sentence and so many people struggle alone.
And this is why we need more folks like yourself who are thriving and being able to share. Like, this is a great example. And without breaking HIPAA, I can attest that there are several CEOs that have bipolar. And they are doing fine, you know? And I think you're right. Like the ones that we're hearing about is like, oh, this celebrity is doing this now. And look what this celebrity is doing. And that's the only face people have for this diagnosis. And it's just not fair.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Absolutely.
Well, the other thing too is I think it's just so rare to hear about it in the Asian community. And so do you think being Asian American adds another layer of complexity to that diagnosis?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about how it is even more highly stigmatized, you know, in our community. It can be, you know, it certainly was in my experience. And also the intergenerational trauma of being nobody would want to really move if everything is fine where they are, you know. I think I mentioned earlier, my grandparents left northern China because of famine. And then they arrived in South Korea and they had to live through Korean War, Japanese occupation, you know, and then my parents were born just after the Korean War. And so it, like, the country was decimated then, you know, like now we see South Korea, this like very vibrant, successful country, but like it was decimated in 1950, you know, and so many of us have carry that intergenerational trauma with us. And my parents, like they still haven't had time to heal, like, and they're in fight or flight, and they came to the States, to a country they don't speak the language, don't understand the culture. They changed careers because they weren't running up. My dad was a teacher in Korea, you know, he wasn't running a little restaurant. And, you know, to go to that kind of very demanding manual labor job is very challenging. And so, yeah, like, again, like when talking about like how does this affects, you know, adding a layer to the complexity of my diagnosis, it's like, you know, we talked about nature, nurture, like this was my nurture, like my environment I grew up was kind of in constant threat state, you know, and a lot of my work as an advocate is separating trauma from culture because there's too much confusion fusing the two. And trauma is not culture. Like I reject that, you know, like war and pain is not part of my culture. I love my culture. I'm proud of my identity. I'm proud of where I come from. I'm sad that my people have been through a lot, but we survived, you know? And so I am fully of the belief that we can celebrate our culture and be proud of it and leave that trauma behind, you know? Like, yeah.
That's a beautiful distinction, I think, to remind people of that. Like, don't use your cultural background and heritage as a place to blame some of your sufferings and diagnoses. It's really the trauma that comes with it that have occurred to your people in the past that have been passed down, like you said. And maybe mental health was not a luxury that our parents could sit around to figure out and then teach us and model to us how to practice. I'm just thinking about like how, you know, my parents didn't have words for certain things. And so I never, you know, actually I was thinking about this the other day about how I think Peggy and I were talking about how like I used to like do a lot more like silent treatment when I was like mad at my husband. And it's just because like that's what I grew up seeing. And now like having to unlearn that and everything, I feel like I feel for my parents though, because it's kind of like they never knew the words to say and express their feelings.
They didn't have the tools.
They really didn't. Yeah. And so I can't blame my parents for saying like, wow, why didn't you ever teach me that like the silent treatment is actually like emotional manipulation? Because they didn't know. And and even if they felt like really bad, they didn't know how to really express it. So maybe it was just stifled there, you know? And
Mhm.
I think, so I like what you were sort of saying, that like separating the trauma from the culture. That's huge. That really
Mhm.
is.
We don't have to accept it. Yeah, there's this kind of defeatist attitude of like, oh, 没办法, you know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's how
Yeah.
it is. That's just how it is. I'm like, nope, no. Yeah.
I love that we're all like, oh, we know that phrase very well.
Yeah.
Oh, Michelle, thank you so much. Before we close off, would love to also just would love to ask you a little bit more about the book that's coming out next year and what inspired you to write it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my memoir, again, called Phoenix Girl, How a Fat Asian with Bipolar Found Love, comes out next January with Fifth Avenue Press. And I was inspired to write this book. Like I was telling you that I was in that library, you know, I can still picture myself like scanning the mental health section of the library, you know, bookshelves, and just not finding what I was looking for. And Toni Morrison said, if there's a book you want to read and it hasn't been written, you need to write it yourself.
Love
right.
that.
And so that's what inspired me at age 38, when I like wasn't a writer or anything. And I just went on this journey and have not looked back. Yeah. I just felt so alone then. And I just hope that my book can be there for someone to feel less alone in their experience. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, like, you're writing this book for like 20-year-old you in that library looking for something. And that's so healing in a way for yourself too. And it's going to help someone out there. It really is. And you just even sharing your story today, like, I hope this helps another mom with bipolar disorder out there, or another Asian mom with bipolar disorder, realize that there is hope. And I think that's the hardest part when you're living with these disorders, when you're living through depression, bipolar, it's finding that hope and seeing that there is light at the end of the tunnel. It doesn't have to be like the media paints it, all doom and gloom kind of thing. So you're offering that little ray of hope, I think, for people.
Thank you. Yeah. Doing the best I can. And yeah, I hope that I'm doing the best by my child, you know, and I like never want to use my, you know, my Asianness or or my mental health condition as an excuse to not be a good parent. You know, like I think that is just the most important to me, is that we can show up the best we can for our child. Yeah.
Framing that quote.
Well, thank you again for talking with us today. Again, just being able to destigmatize the diagnosis of bipolar disorder, being able to educate and inspire others. This is why we exist here, for folks like you to share your story and touch the lives of other folks. We always end our episodes with a "what are you doing for your mental health this week" kind of question. And this is usually where we sometimes just like pause and realize we have to think about this a little bit. But if anyone's ready to share, please dive in.
Well, I'll share because I was prepared. Okay. Like I love going out kayaking on the water, and it's not like we do it very often because we got to go like rent a boat and stuff. But you know, this weekend we have special plans on Sunday, so that's, you know, we'll do that. We're gonna go kayak and then probably eat a yummy Korean lunch, you know, so out somewhere. And so I'm really looking forward to that, because there is something really healing about being in nature and seeing all the green. That kind of is, I think, really, really good for your mental health.
Are you cooking? Are you cooking the spicy food?
No. I'm saying somebody, we'll eat out. I'm not cooking.
That sounds like a lovely Sunday.
Yes.
I had one from this morning. Well, last week I finally went and checked out some physical labs that I've been just putting off for like quite a while. And I think they came back okay. But then what I realized was last year when I did labs too, my calcium came back low. And I had bought multivitamins and calcium tabs, found them in the cabinet this morning. And I'm like, dude, these are like expiring in 3 months. And I haven't even like finished it. Oh my God. So today I decided I'm going to take better care of myself and I'm going to finish this bottle before the 3 months that it's going to expire, because I have exactly like 100 pills in there, and it's like, well, what about like 3 months maybe from now? So I'm like, okay, I'm determined to like actually do it. So that's what I'm gonna do this week. I started taking my vitamins again.
Oh my gosh.
Good for you.
I love that. Oh, I guess mine. You're so funny. You're like, I was prepared. I was not prepared. I think what I did this week was like propagate some plants. Before we hit record, listeners, I was admiring Michelle's plants in her background, and then I tried to show her mine, but then it was really hard because of my computer. But my plants are just getting wild. I have a lot of plants that you can propagate. They're just getting a little wily. So I snip, stick them in water until roots grow, and I start plopping them in the dirt. And there's just something really, I don't know, I just like taking care of plants, and there's something very symbolic of the act of pruning doesn't necessarily have to be painful. And I think the act of like taking care of yourself in that same way can give birth to new life. I don't know, maybe I'm going too far with my analogy, but like, you know, like I look at my plant, I'm like, oh man, you need some help. And I start like snip and dip it in water, let the roots grow, brand new plant. And then I also, to my husband's pleasure, means I don't have to go out and buy more plants. I can just make
I also
more.
like to give them away, which is also a really nice thing.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's what I should do, because I'm also just hoarding all my propagations. But that, I feel like, is probably my, you know, thing I did for my mental health.
It's kind of like revitalizing to like, you know, create new life too in a way, which is nice.
And then it makes your original plant like healthier too, because they're just like, there's a lot I'm taking care of. Take this off. So
we are so honored that we had you today, Michelle. And for our listeners, if you want to find more of Michelle, do you want to tell everyone your handle or where else they can find you?
Yeah, Michelle Yang Writer is my handle at Instagram. That's where you can find me. MichelleYangWriter.com is my website. So well, I'm easy to get in touch with.
We will look out for your book next year. Very excited.
Thank you for all your work. This is an amazing podcast, you know, this is very important work. That's, you know, I don't think anybody else is doing it. So really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
We hope you have enjoyed Healing the Tigress in our conversations on maternal mental health in the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Please follow our show and our Instagram page to catch our latest episodes. We have so many fantastic guests and deep topics that we are so excited to cover soon.
If you enjoyed this episode or would like to support us more, please leave us a rating or a review and share this podcast with a friend to spread the word. Check out the show notes for more links. Thanks for joining us today, and we hope these conversations will help our AAPI mothers heal their inner tigress and honor their mental health as they deserve to. See you next time.